Thank you so much for joining our March webinar, Using Census Bureau Data to Facilitate Resiliency and Economic Recovery. My name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the Program Director of the All-America City Awards here at the National Civic League. We are a 125-year-old nonprofit, and we aim to advance civic engagement to create more equitable and thriving communities. Our All-America City Awards is our flagship program, began in 1949 to recognize outstanding achievements in the field of civic engagement and local communities. So we use the All-America City Awards to recognize that civic engagement, and then we have this webinar series to promote the best practices from communities, as well as share resources and tools that we think will help folks with their engagement work. So just a quick plug for this year's awards before we get going. We have recently named our finalists for the 2021 All-America City Awards. They submitted applications surrounding the theme of building equitable and resilient communities. We have 20 great finalists. They range in size from 9,000 all the way up to 1.2 million and hail from 15 different states. And we're really excited to have them join us for our awards competition in June. And following this webinar, I will be sending out a follow-up email in case you're interested in joining us for our virtual event. But today's main focus is our webinar with the U.S. Census Bureau. We're really excited to be able to talk to you about how you can use Census Bureau data to measure resiliency, help your local businesses, and even help you out with community grant applications. Joining us today, we have Andy Haight, Data Product and Data User Liaison in the Economic Management Division at the U.S. Census Bureau, as well as Dr. Lewis Brown, Associate Professor of Health Promotion and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. So right before I hand it over to Andy to get us kicked off, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules. You'll notice that you are all muted. We're asking everyone to stay muted until the end of both presenters' slides, at which point we'll have a Q&A. You can answer questions throughout the presentation in the chat, and I'll keep track of those, or you can use the raise hand feature when we start our Q&A session. We are recording today's webinar, so you'll receive a copy of that recording as well as a follow-up email with the slides, so be on the lookout for that. And that is all from me, so I'm happy to hand it over to our first presenter, Andy Haight. Andy, can you get us started?
Great, awesome. So thank you so much, Rebecca. So again, as I said, my name is Andy Haight. I'm an economist at the U.S. Census Bureau. Started working at the Census Bureau in September of 1987, so I may be at the Bureau for a little longer than some of you are old, which is a little scary to sort of think about. But today we're going to be talking about the Census Bureau data resources that we have that can help communities understand their resiliency to different types of economic shocks and other kinds of shocks, and how these data can help organizations recover. I'm going to stop my camera just so we can make sure we don't have any bandwidth issues. I'm, of course, presenting from my dining room, as you can see from the room that I'm currently sitting in. So hopefully none of my children will end up taking the internet down on me, but we will see how that is. So to get us started, let's talk a little bit about the Census Bureau. You'd have to be living under a rock to not know that we just completed the largest peacetime operation that we do in the United States. Every 10 years, we hire about 500,000 people to count every single person in America. It's called the decennial census, the population census. It is a massive undertaking, and as you can imagine, this program is one of the most important things we do at the Census Bureau, but it is far from the only thing we do. We actually conduct more than 130 different monthly, quarterly, annual, and periodic programs every year. They include demographic programs like the Decennial Census and the American Community Survey. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the ACS, so I'm not going to really talk very much about it, except to say this is a fantastic resource for demographic, socioeconomic, and housing characteristics that help us understand resiliency of our communities and the ability to recover from or deal with and recover from different types of shocks. A community, for example, that has a large percentage of older folks who are disabled, who are of low income and have limited access to transportation, has a very different resiliency profile than a community that is mostly made up of younger people who are higher income and have 3 cars parked in their driveway. They can flee a disaster. They can get out of the way of a hurricane a lot easier than that first group. So that group you would typically think of as being more resilient, that community being more resilient. And these data that I just talked about are all available from the American Community Survey. So it's a great resource. However, we have an entire other side of the Census Bureau, which is the part of census that I work in, that I have spent my 34 years working in. That is our economic directorate, the area of census that actually does all of our business surveys. Those business surveys can best be visualized in a pyramid, the slide on the right. Every single month, we conduct a series of monthly and quarterly surveys. Many of you are probably familiar with these. You typically hear about them when the reporter on the news comes on and says, the Commerce Department announced today that retail sales last month were X, or that this many Americans bought this many cars last month. Phooey, that's not from the Commerce Department, it's from the Census Bureau. Now, of course, we are an agency of the Department of Commerce, just Commerce takes all the credit for these economic indicator surveys. Below there, we have our annual programs. And at the bottom of the pyramid, we have our economic census, which is our baseline program. A pyramid does a nice job of describing the hierarchy of these programs, how one is baselined against the other. But that pyramid also gives us some information about the level of detail that is shown in the surveys. And when we're thinking about community resilience, programs that provide really detailed industry and geographic data, like the economic census, can often be more useful to folks than the annual programs or monthly and quarterly surveys that aren't quite as geographically or industry detailed. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So at the very top of the pyramid is our economic indicators. As I said, Census does 17 of these leading economic indicator surveys. Excuse me, they are all sample surveys. And because they are sample surveys, all but 2 of these are only shown at the national level. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, how am I going to use these data products to understand the resiliency of my communities? You can't. These normal monthly economic indicators give us information about how the industry and how the economy in the US as a whole is doing. And it can be very valuable to understand how is the whole nation changing. So is the changes that I'm seeing in my community in terms of this particular shock, the pandemic, et cetera, are they in line with what's happening in the national level data or not? So these programs are good for just normal comparative purposes. However, there are 2 programs I want to specifically highlight that can be very valuable to help us understand resiliency and the ability to deal with disasters. The first of them that's highlighted in red is our building permits data. Every single month, we publish data down to the permit issuing area level on the number of and the value of new residential building permits that have been issued in that permit area. Where I live in Maryland, Anne Arundel County issues the building permits. If my house was physically located in the city of Annapolis, my building permit would come from the city of Annapolis. So Census publishes data down to the down to the county and municipality level. And these data can be really interesting in helping us understand future economic growth in our communities. When a builder comes in to build new houses in a particular community, the first thing they do is they pull the permits. Then they start construction, then they sell the house, then people move in. The very first step of that is pulling the permits. So this is a great resource. The second one that is highlighted here is our trade data. Yes, the Census Bureau actually conducts monthly surveys that look at how much imports and exports we are doing in the United States. The data are published by industry, but for over 10,000 commodity codes and by country of origination and destination. These data can be really valuable when we think about community resilience, because some of the businesses that were most able to deal with the coronavirus pandemic were ones that were able to pivot, to think about who their customers were prior to the pandemic and think about who their customers could be during the pandemic or after the pandemic. And very often, small businesses especially don't often think of customers for their products outside of the United States. They rely mostly on their domestic customers, but I've talked to dozens, if not hundreds, of small business owners who were sort of amazed to find that there were other businesses like them that were actually exporting. Finding out, for example, I talked with a woman who was running a small sandal manufacturing company in New Jersey. Finding out how many sandals we export out of Port Authority, New York, New Jersey every single year was just astounding to her. She had no idea. And when I then told her what country they were exporting them to, she's like, wow, okay, how do I get in on that? How do I grow my business? How do I help my community be more resilient by letting us deal with these kinds of shocks? As you can see on the slide, I'm a bit of a beer nut, so I included some imports and exports data on beer. And I was personally interested to read, to learn that Chile is actually our #1 beer exporting partner. So I want to research that further. At the second tier of the pyramid is our annual programs. Every single year, we conduct a number of annual surveys that provide more detail than what is available in those monthly and quarterly surveys. If you learn nothing from me today, it is that county business patterns and non-employer statistics should always be your first go-to data products from the Census Bureau to understand your local economy. County business patterns publishes information on employer businesses. These are businesses with paid employees. They are the businesses we typically think of. And when we're thinking about the resilience of a community to shocks, knowing something about the mix of businesses in that community can help us understand how resilient that community is to a disaster. For example, a community where a very large percentage of its workforce works in a very small number of businesses, small number of industries, could be thought of as potentially being less resilient than one where the workforce is spread over a much larger number of businesses. So county business patterns gives us insight into those employer businesses. Non-employer statistics then cover self-employed people. And often when we think about the resilience of a community, we forget about the fact that there are a lot of people today that are running their own business that report the income for their business on the 1040 Schedule C or the 1040 Schedule SE. They are not filing a business tax form. They are an independent contractor. They're a sole proprietor. They are someone who's filing their business taxes on their personal tax form. These guys are all non-employers, according to the Census Bureau. There's 24 million of them versus about 8 million employer businesses. In some industries, non-employers are not significant at all. You can sort of ignore them. It's a little scary to think of a non-employer hospital. But if you're interested in understanding the resilience of a community in terms of its ability to have its kids be taken care of in daycare centers, there's 10 times more non-employer daycare centers in the US than there are employer daycare centers. The non-employers are all those home-based daycare centers that we've had to rely on when we're all stuck at home and can't work because our kids are annoying the daylights out of us and we have to send our kids to a daycare center. So these are two really great programs. The next one I want to quickly mention is our public sector data. We actually publish data on state and local governments. There's a couple of unique attributes about these data, but this is a great resource to help us understand the employment and workforce and revenues and expenditures of governments. Because the data are all considered public record, there's virtually no confidentiality restrictions to these data. So you can actually pull up individual records for individual governments in your area. When I was buying the house that we are currently living in, my wife and I researched how much did the various counties in Maryland spend on school textbooks, spend on teacher salaries, spend on school lunch programs, a variety of other education-related expenses. And we could actually pull up from the Census Bureau's records information on how much Anne Arundel County Public Schools spends on each of those different categories. So it's very, very detailed data. Now, after that, we have the economic census. This is at the bottom of our pyramid. This is our most detailed program, provides the most detailed industry breakouts, geographic breakouts, other dimensions, and data variables. In addition, the economic census is also the only program we have in econ that publishes product lines data. So when we're thinking about the different products and services provided by businesses, those types of statistics are available in our product lines data. So think about a grocery store. A grocery store has total sales. We publish data on their total sales of that store. But if you wanted to know how much of their sales were for pharmaceuticals, or how much of it was for baked goods, or how much of it was for tobacco products, for example, those types of data are available in our product lines file. So it's a very detailed breakout. Data is available every 5 years. Now, many people ask me questions about the characteristics of owners of businesses. They want to know how many women-owned businesses are there in their communities. When they're thinking about resilience, they want to understand how does the demographic characteristics of the population that live in an area, how well or poorly does it match with the demographic characteristics of the businesses in those communities? Well, the program that I've highlighted here, the ABS, the Annual Business Survey, publishes information on the race, ethnicity, gender, and veteran status of the business owner. So this is where you're going to go to get those women-owned business, or those minority-owned business, or those veteran-owned business, or those Asian-owned business information. This program only covers employer businesses, those businesses with paid employees. And somebody may be thinking, that's a real bummer. There's a lot of self-employed people that are women, that are minorities, that are other different types of groups. Where do you capture them? Well, up until about 6 months ago, we didn't. We were missing the non-employers. But about 6 months ago, we introduced a brand new program called Non-Employer Statistics Demographics that now plugs that gap. It gives that same type of a detailed breakout on the race, ethnicity, gender, and veteran status of the business owner, but it's now for self-employed people. So this is a great resource. Now, the last couple of slides before I turn it over to Dr. Brown, I want to talk about COVID. We couldn't possibly do a webinar for you all without talking about the C word. So I want to very quickly talk about some of those resources. During the beginnings of the coronavirus pandemic, Census looked at the programs that we have and did an evaluation of how they could be used by planners and a variety of other people, emergency managers, healthcare officials, health department officials, to use to understand how the pandemic was going to spread across the US. But we also realized that we were going to have to stand up some new programs that measure how businesses and other things were being actually impacted. Not how they might be being impacted, how resilient they are, but how they actually were being impacted. And the first of those programs is the one that I have the slide up here, Business Formation Statistics. This gives you information on startups. How were startups impacted by the pandemic? If you looked at the data, you'd see that startups at the very beginning of the pandemic took a huge hit. Very few people who were thinking about starting a new business said, this is not a good idea, let's hold off. So they waited. Well, now we got to July and August and September of last year. They said, okay, now maybe is a good time. So we've seen a big, huge increase in those business formations. This program provides that information. The next program I want to quickly talk about is Small Business Pulse Survey. We knew that small businesses were likely going to be impacted by the pandemic, and understanding how they were going to be impacted would help us understand their resilience, the resilience of those communities. So this survey has been producing since April of last year weekly information on how small businesses are being impacted. It's a pretty detailed program, and it does provide information by NAICS sector. So the chart on the right-hand side of my slide, you probably can't see it, but the second to last bar on the right is for NAICS 72. That is the accommodation and food services sector. That is the sector that contains restaurants and hotels. One sector, an area that we've all, I'm sure, heard of, has been really impacted by the pandemic. This gives you information on how those small businesses are impacted. The next one is our Household Pulse Survey. Like the Small Business Pulse Survey, this was a weekly program that provides information on how people and households were impacted. The data were collected starting back in April. They are currently in phase finished up phase 3 and they're moving into phase 4 of this survey. The Small Business Pulse already is in phase 4. In each of these phases, the questions that we've asked have changed slightly. It made sense to ask certain questions at the beginning of the pandemic that didn't make sense to ask later on, and vice versa. So one tip I'm going to say, and an ask maybe for all of you, is as you use these programs, and I would encourage you all to check these out. I've included links to all these programs in my slides. Rebecca's going to be sharing this slide deck with you all after we are all done. I would encourage you all to get in there and check them out. As you see things that you like, and as you see things that drive you crazy, please let us know. We have made a lot of changes to these programs because of the feedback from groups like yours. The next one that I want to quickly talk about is community resilience estimates. So when we've been thinking about the impacts of the pandemic, CDC and HHS and a variety of other agencies provided for us a list of risk factors that they felt were the ones that were best to be able to understand how resilient a community is to a disaster, like the coronavirus pandemic. We applied those 11 risk factors to the 2018 American Community Survey data. And from that, we've now created estimates that are available down to the census tract level on how resilient a community is to a disaster. The screenshot on the right-hand side is of a dashboard that they have. This is actually an old screenshot. I need to update that. But it's a great program because it lets you look at communities that have a large percentage of the population that have no risk factors. You would think of that community as being very resilient, versus those that have 1 or 2 risk factors, versus those that have 3 or more risk factors. The census tracts that have a high percentage of the population that has 3 or more risk factors, that we would typically think of as being a much less resilient community. That might be communities that have a high percentage of people who are over 65, people who have diabetes, people who are low income. There's a variety of risk factors, 11 specifically, that went into creating this estimates. Of these COVID programs, this is the one that I think is most likely to live beyond the coronavirus pandemic, because this is the program where by simply changing the risk factors themselves, we can make this program work for all types of disasters. Across our country this past year, we had hurricanes like we've not seen before. We actually dipped into the Greek alphabet and actually had to name hurricanes after Greek letters because we ran out of the regular alphabet. We also had a horrible fire and flood season last year. By applying different risk factors based upon each of these types of disasters, this program could actually be used to actually understand how resilient is a community to things like fires or floods or hurricanes or tornadoes. The risk factors that would be important when you're thinking about those types of disasters, some of them might be the same risk factors as are important when we think about a pandemic like coronavirus, but some of them are probably unique to them. Access to cars, to transportation is probably not going to help us when we're thinking about the pandemic. You can't drive away from a virus. However, access to a car would be really important when you're thinking about the resilience of a community to a hurricane. If you didn't have transportation, how would you get out of that community to flee from that hurricane or that other disaster? So this is a great resource, and I would really encourage you all to check this out. Again, it's available, the data are available down to the tract level. The last couple of ones I want to talk about, and then I'm going to be turning it over to Dr. Brown. We also recognize that state governments were likely being impacted by the pandemic too, so we are now publishing information on selected monthly state sales tax collections. I know in the state of Maryland, where I live, the state has seen a huge drop in gasoline sales tax revenues because we aren't driving the way we were prior to the pandemic. So this program provides that type of data. And we also stood up something called the monthly state retail sales report. This is a program that supplements our monthly retail trade survey, which is one of those leading economic indicator surveys, but it provides information on retail sales by state. When you look at the retail sales data by state, you can see there are certain states in the country that rely on the retail sector more than others. You could argue that when the retail sector gets impacted, that those states that rely on that sector more are likely less resilient. They are going to be affected more by a decline in the retail sector than by others, than by other industries. And within retail sector, we know that there were some industries in retail that really took a beating during the pandemic. It would be very challenging if you owned a clothing store during this past year. You probably saw a substantial drop in your income, in your revenue, your sales for your business. But non-store retailers, what we typically think of as online shopping, boomed last year. So another great program. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and then I promise I'm turning over to Dr. Brown, is we created a special portal for you to access all of this COVID data. I'm not going to get a chance to demo it for you today, but this is the Coronavirus Interactive Data Hub. I have provided a link to it on the page. There's a number of important components to it. There are dashboards, fully interactive dashboards, like what we're seeing here in the upper left-hand corner. I have zoomed in and focused on Middlesex County, New Jersey, as this. So we're looking at the demographic and economic characteristics of that county. There's policy maps, which are in the bottom right-hand corner, where you can go in and look at certain characteristics. In this case, it's looking at the number of uninsured people in a particular area. Again, very important when we're thinking about resilience. And in January, we added links to 38 additional data sets from other federal and third-party data providers. So if you all have been struggling to find data on PPP loans and CARES Act monies and a variety of other programs that were stood up this past year to try to help our country deal with the pandemic, those data are available now from the COVID-19 Data Hub. So I, again, would really encourage you all to check this out. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Brown, and he can talk about that. And then I'll be coming back at the end and doing a quick demo. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Can you guys hear me okay? And can you guys see my screen okay? All right, I'm getting thumbs up. Good. I will apologize in advance if you hear my dogs snoring in the background. I decided I wouldn't wake them up. So I'm excited to be here today to talk about building resilient communities. I'm trained as a community psychologist and really interested in helping build strong communities. And also I write a lot of grants, and I know you guys are interested in bringing resources to your communities. And so if you're interested in writing grants to build resilient communities, that's where I'm going to focus today, and talking about how we can use census data along with other data sources to write really compelling grants and need statements in particular. It's amazing how much data is out there, and Andy talked about it a lot, and I haven't even wrapped my brain around everything that the Census Bureau has going on. So there's lots to work with. Let me get to the next slide. There we go. As a first step, you can, in putting together a needs statement, you want to get a sense of the data that's out there and what fits for the particular request for proposals. And a go-to place that some of you might be familiar with is these county profiles. I've found really handy. Typically I'm working with a particular community and I want to describe that particular community. And, there's a lot of like state level and national level data that's out there, but getting those fine-grained estimates is harder. And so I put up a few data sources that give you some helpful county level information. And so the census county profiles will have things like race and ethnicity, and age and income and educational attainment and health insurance and disability and a number of other characteristics. So you can kind of pull up your county relatively quickly and look through and see what you've got and pull the relevant information for a grant that you're going after. Also, the Health Resources and Services Administration, as well as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, have put together some handy county level information. And there's others out there. Those are just a few. I do also want to mention that a lot of the time there will be some data available locally that's not available across the entire United States and is maybe not so systematic. So a lot of this is about developing partnerships and talking with partners and seeing what data they have available and pulling that in as well. So I don't think there's any one-stop shop, but certainly the Census Bureau provides a lot of great data, and it's important for us to learn how to pull from it, which Andy talked about a lot and is going to talk about more. Okay, so the community resilience estimates that Andy talked about, I think, are really cool. I mean, the fact that that's available at the census tract level is super cool. It's really hard to find such fine-grained data available. And so the fact that something as important as resilience, which, given all the disasters out there and all the stresses, building resilience has been shown to be so powerful in promoting health. And so, of course, that's something we want to build. And I think the fact that the community resilience estimates are available at the census tract level, like normally I'll use the data to kind of help fill out a needs statement in a grant, but you could actually use this to kind of micro target where you want to put resources. So you could write into your grant, okay, we're gonna focus resources on these particular high need districts or census tracts within our community, or we're going to deliver programs because they're particularly needed there. So it can be a means of deciding where you want to focus your efforts. And also it has potential for use as a long-term outcome in evaluation work. If these community resilience estimates do survive the pandemic, which I look forward to surviving the pandemic myself, then we'll be able to track over time. And so you could use that as your long-term outcome if you have an evaluation component for your grant as well. So you would want to collect some local data on program delivery and that kind of thing, but you could potentially connect it to changes in resilience over time. And if we're focused on building resilience, then we can track those and hopefully see some improvements where we're focusing our programs and resources. Okay, so I did want to share just one grant narrative. I thought it might be helpful to give an example. So we applied for funding from the Hogg Foundation, which is a foundation specific to Texas, and they're interested in promoting the census count in Texas. And so we wrote a grant, and we're focused on hard to count populations in El Paso and Hudspeth County, which are both right on the border. So we're reaching out low income, predominantly immigrant communities. And so I don't want to talk a lot about the project, but I just wanted to mention that we have an example in the later slides past this one. It's just the text from the grant. So if you think an example would be helpful, then there's an example for you, and I'm going to pass it back over to Andy, who's going to do a better job than I did in using the census data to probe probe the community and really describe it in richer detail. Thank you.
Awesome. Nothing like managing expectations. Thank you. Thank you. So let me go ahead and share. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. So in my starting session, I told you all about these fantastic programs we have at the Census Bureau. Are you guys able to see my screen, just to confirm? Okay, great. So you learned about these different programs we had, and you probably were thinking, okay, where can I go to actually access this data? What are the different tools that Census has? We have dozens of tools at the Census Bureau. At the top of this list is a tool called Quick Facts that allows you to look at some selected statistics from a few of our programs. Below there, we have a tool called My Congressional District. There's a screenshot of it over on the right-hand side that lets me look at data, a couple of selected statistics by congressional districts. At the very bottom of this list is our API. For you real data nerds out there who want to be able to build your own platforms and download large chunks of data, we have released over 400 data sets from the Census Bureau now in our data API. And you can actually tie your tools directly to our data set, so you don't have to curate the data. In fact, the tool I'm going to demo for you uses the Census Bureau's data API to actually present the information on a map-based interface. So it's a very great tool. Right above there is our data.census.gov tool. This is our enterprise dissemination platform. It replaces the old American Fact Finder application that some of you knew and loved. I've been around Census for long enough to actually have been at the birth of American Fact Finder. So I do miss it a little bit, but I will tell you data.census.gov is a great resource. Those community profiles, those county profiles that Dr. Brown talked about are available in data.census.gov. The tools that I want to quickly show for you, one I'm going to demo and one I want to tell you about are Census Business Builder and On the Map for Emergency Management, because I think these two tools together can be really useful for you all. The first tool I want to talk about is Census Business Builder. There are actually two editions of CBB. CBB was initially released in 2015 to help entrepreneurs and small business owners access the basic data that they need for their business plan. If I decided I was tired of working for the Census Bureau and I wanted to open my Greek restaurant that I've been thinking about opening for half of my life, I could go to Census Business Builder Small Business Edition, the version here at the bottom of the slide. I could choose restaurants, I could choose the county that I want to research, and it would allow me to bring up some demographic and business data about that community to help me decide, is this a good place to open my Greek restaurant? Are the customers of my restaurant there, or are there other kinds of areas, another area that might be even better, okay? We also, though, a year later, released a tool called the Regional Analyst Edition of Census Business Builder. And that's the one I'm going to show you all today, because I think from a resilience standpoint, this edition actually may be better for you all, because number one, it allows you to look at all of the demographic characteristics and business characteristics for all the businesses in your area, as opposed to just one type of business at a time, like the Small Business Edition does. In the Small Business Edition, I choose a single type of business, like a restaurant, daycare center, auto repair facility, whatever, and I do my research. In the Regional Analyst Edition, I can look at all the businesses in my area. But more importantly, and to Dr. Brown's comment, the Regional Analyst Edition lets me look at a region. It lets me build a custom geography. So with that, I'm going to quickly jump out and actually do a live demo for you of Census Business Builder Regional Analyst Edition. To get to the tool, we would go to Explore Data and then Data Tools and Apps. From the Data Tools and Apps list, I then choose Census Business Builder. Fortunately, it begins with the letter C, so it's up toward the top of the list. And that'll bring me to the CBB homepage. On this page, I have a link to the two editions, as well as a lot of flyers and other types of tutorial materials, etc. When I click on the Regional Analyst Edition icon, The application is now going to launch. And this is where I'm going to go in and I'm going to start off with the area that I want to research, the community that I want to check. So I'm going to stick with Dr. Brown's example, and we're going to go to El Paso County. So I typed in El Paso, and it brings up all the list of all the El Pasos in the US. We're going to choose El Paso County, Texas. And the application is now going to zoom me in on El Paso County. And it's going to allow me to go in and now and browse the different types of information for this particular county. The data that is in Census Business Builder is from 8 different Census Bureau programs and a number of other non-Census Bureau programs. So we had a lot of feedback from users saying, Census does a nice job of producing business data on employment and payroll, but you guys don't have wages data. If I want to look at the resilience of a community in terms of the wages that are paid by businesses in my community, and are those living wages, Census doesn't have wages data, but BLS does. So we've actually incorporated the Bureau of Labor Statistics quarterly Census of Employment and Wages data in this tool. Now, in the Regional Analyst Edition, I can build a custom geography. So in Dr. Brown's example, he was talking about El Paso County and Hudspeth County. To build a custom geography, I would click on Edit Region. I would click on the other geography I'm interested in this case, Hudspeth County. It asked me, do I want to add it to my region? I would say yes. So now I've created a 2-county region. I can name that region. So I'm going to call this EP, EP and R, for want of something else to call it. And when I'm done editing it, it's now going to create an outline around that 2-county area. I can now browse any of the 180 or so data variables that are available in this tool, but I can also create a custom region report that pulls the data in this application for these 2 counties. It aggregates the data and summarizes it into a summary level report. So for example, if I now click on Create Region Report, we can then see that in that 2-county region, we will be able to see what the total population is in that 2-county region. So once it finishes building over here, apologize for my slow internet service at home. Probably one of my kids are probably on the internet doing something they shouldn't be doing. And they're adults too, which is really sad. 29 and 24, so they should know better than annoying the daylights out of poor dear old dad. So here's our cover sheet. So in that 2-county region, there's 840,477 people. This is the percentage of them broken out by age and race and ethnicity. We have some socioeconomic data for that 2-county region, housing data, business data, et cetera. So it's a nice sort of one-page or one document profile. These reports, these profiles can be saved. So if I copy this URL and send that URL to a colleague, they can then click on that and it'll bring them right back to the report where I left them. And same thing with the map. So if I build a custom map of a number of geographies, I can then save that work. Now, so far we're looking at data at the county level. And you may be saying, okay, well, this is all well and good, but Dr. Brown mentioned that Census has all this great geographic data. Let me drill down and identify specific areas to research. So let's say we wanted to find, we wanted to find on this map all the census tracts that have certain characteristics. Okay, I want to find all the low income, high Hispanic percentage, and low internet usage communities, because those are the areas that I'm concerned about. I can change my level of geography to tract in this tool. So now we're going to see census tract level information in Census Business Builder. It's right now building the tracts. You can see there's an awful lot of tracts in El Paso County. There's only 1 tract in Hudspeth County. And I learned at the very start of our presentation that that's not a surprise. There's like 5,000 people that live in that county. So now I want to go in and I want to say, I want to find all of the tracts that have certain characteristics. The way I would do that is I would go ahead and use a filter. So let's say I want to add a filter, and the first thing I want to filter on is household income. That's going to be one of my main characteristics. So I want to filter on average income. I select that variable. And now if I want to find all the low income areas, I can move this little slider bar, and little by little, you see that the map is refreshing and some areas are disappearing. They're turning gray. They don't qualify. So I can keep moving this, and I can keep adjusting that cutoff to whatever I particularly want it to. I can adjust that by using the slider bar, or I can actually enter in the values manually. So let's say I wanted to find all the tracts where the household income is less than $50,000. I could apply that value manually. When I then apply the filter, only those geographies that qualify are now saved. So you can see a whole bunch of these tracts around Fort Bliss. These don't qualify, but here are some that do. Well, now I want to go in, I want to add another filter. I can do up to 6. So let's say my second filter is I want to find the percentage of the population that is Hispanic. So I can scroll down, I can choose percent Hispanic as my characteristic, select that variable, and now I want to find a high Hispanic percentage. So again, I'm going to move my slider bar, and I'm going to move it up to when we get up to about 70 or so percent. Let's go up a little bit more. You can see slowly by slowly, they're starting to drop out. I'm getting a smaller and smaller list of geographies that qualify. When I now apply the filter, both those two characteristics are now going to be set. So now I have identified those areas that I'm concerned about. And now I can say, let me do a third one. Let's do that internet access. I'm going to go over to socioeconomic characteristics, housing characteristics, and I'm going to choose percentage with a broadband internet subscription. So if you think about internet access, you need to have a subscription to be able to get internet. That's one of the statistics that we have. These data are all by the way, from the American Community Survey. I'm going to choose that particular variable. And now I want to find all the areas that have low internet usage. So I'm going to drag this bar down. And you can see I went, whoa, a whole lot of them disappeared. Maybe I went too far. Let me go ahead and move it back up, add some ones back up again. Now when I apply the filter, the few tracks that are now left are the ones that I would want to focus my research on. I want to focus my funding on. So I can see there's a couple over here. There's a couple of tracks over here. There's a few right along the border here in El Paso County. I can now run a report for each of those individual tracks and actually generate a specific tract level report. So I'm going to go ahead and click on one of those tracks, and I can run a report for Census Tract 103.46 and generate that report for that specific tract. But I can also download the data that's on this map. So if I say, I really like this, I now want to find out what are all these tracks that I want to focus on, I can go over here into the tool and actually do a download and download all the tract level data off of this map. I have just scratched the surface of what you can do in Census Business Builder. I would really encourage you all to get in here and play with it. We added some recent features, new features recently. You can now look at more than one variable on the map at the same time. So if I want to look at both population and household income on the map at the same time, or maybe and percent bachelor's degree or higher, I can now view two variables on the map at the same time. This was just added about a month ago. You can see when it builds, we'll get these little circles that will then allow us to see what is the percent bachelor's degree or higher on this particular map. And we can then go ahead and look at that data. And if we download it, we'll get both variables. You can see the dashboard, the legend has now been updated to show what those different size circles now mean. So that's a brand new feature. There's a lot of other things you can do in this tool. I've barely scratched the surface of the data, but I just wanted to kind of wet your whistle a little bit for what you can do in this particular tool. So let me go back out over to my PowerPoint presentation, finish off, and then we'll be able to talk and take some questions. So this is a screenshot of the Census Business Builder Regional Analyst Edition. I have zoomed in specifically on the city of Annapolis, Maryland, and we're looking at census tract level data within the city of Annapolis. That would again allow me to sort of identify certain things. One point that I will point out to you is that tract boundaries and city boundaries overlap. Same thing with zip code boundaries. They do not follow state and county boundary lines. So just be aware when you're looking at geography that you have to understand a little bit about what the geography are. So the last thing I want to quickly talk about is our emergency management resources. When we're thinking about the coronavirus pandemic and the ability for communities to be resilient to different types of disasters, getting data about those disasters is important. We have an entire emergency management page on census.gov. I've included the link to it and a screenshot of it in the left-hand side. We created special displays for every single hurricane last year. You can see Hurricane Eta is the one that's displayed on the screen right now. This is where you can go to actually access the COVID-19 Data Hub. It's accessible via this emergency management page. But on this page is also a tool called On the Map for Emergency Management. So what OTM-EM, as we like to call it, we love acronyms at the Census Bureau, by the way. What OTM-EM does is it overlays the boundaries of current federal and state disaster declaration areas on top of a map with our data. And it then tabulates and aggregates that data for those disaster declaration area boundaries. So if you wanted to know how many people were located in the state of Texas and Louisiana that were impacted by emergency management declaration 3554, and you want to know what that specific disaster was, you can actually choose that disaster on the map, and it'll bring up a report about the demographics of that area that was impacted by that particular disaster. This map is updated every 6 hours. And during hurricane season, we actually update it every 4 hours, because obviously a hurricane path can shift a lot, and understanding what are the communities that are in the path of that hurricane can help us understand how resilient and those communities are and how they might be impacted by this type of disaster. So this is a great resource for you all to use to understand areas that are actually being impacted by disasters. Census Business Builder Regional Analyst Edition can be useful to help you understand areas that might be impacted. If I want to do some what if analysis, if a hurricane were to come up the coast of Florida and were to hit these coastal counties, how many people would likely be impacted? How many businesses would be impacted? How many hospitals are in those impact counties that could be impacted? That type of data, that what if analysis, can be done using Census Business Builder. So in summary, we have a lot of data. Sort of goes without saying. Our programs are pretty amazing. I still, even after 34 years at the Census Bureau, am astounded sometimes about the amount of data that we actually have. I would encourage you all to check it out. You guys have a role in promoting it and also in ensuring that the information that we are providing is useful by giving us feedback. I'm going to say it again, in nearly every tool we have on census.gov, there is a send feedback link. We really do read. We read those comments. I am the project manager for the Census Business Builder tool. And when you click on send feedback, it goes to my email inbox. So you are actually getting a human being in the DC metro area. And all of the updates that we've made to CBB over the years have come because people have said, Andy, I really like this, but, and then they give me a long list of, I wish you could do this and this and this and this and this, and we do it. So I would encourage you all to promote the use of these tools. The data that is in these tools is of the high quality that it is because people and businesses responded to our surveys. So in as much work as you're doing with businesses in your communities, we encourage your help in promoting response to our programs. Garbage in, garbage out is the rule at Census. When people don't fill out their forms or businesses don't complete their surveys, the quality of the data that we can publish is reduced. And at a certain point, we actually will start suppressing data because we don't like to make things up. In our economic programs example, directorate, We typically have a 70% minimum response rate to our surveys. If we get less than 70% of the businesses responding, we will suppress the data. That surprises a lot of people because a lot of third-party data providers do 5% sample surveys and are thrilled with the 30% response rate. That would put us into cardiac arrest at the Census Bureau. So we are pretty nerdy when it comes to the quality of data. So I am done. This is my email address and phone number. I know we've reached 3 o'clock almost, so we can take maybe a couple of questions. But I wanted to just offer, if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to contact me by email or by phone. So thank you so much, Rebecca.